Alderneys Key FM.
James Dent. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Dougal.
How are you, firstly?
I am well, thank you, Dougal.
Good. Thank you very much. Nice to spare of you to spare the time to be with us this morning. Now, it's very busy, particularly for you at this moment in time, and you are part of the CCA. Could you firstly just explain what that is to us, James?
The CCA is the Civil Contingencies Authority. Do you want me to sort of...
Yes, please.
Go on, and I'll if you...
Yeah, that would be lovely.
Away.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dougal. And let me start by actually saying that I'm not sure that I can quite replicate the standard set by our president during his morning briefings, but I'm going to give it a go this morning. As listeners are probably beginning to understand, the current arrangements for managing in an emergency are somewhat different to those which are in place in normal times. So I thought this morning it would be helpful for members of the public to understand what is happening and what the role of the Civil Contingencies Authority, or the CCA, is. I know our President has touched on this in his own broadcast, but a few insights from myself as our Alderney representative would be useful. The CCA is an authority set up under the Civil Contingencies Bailiwick of Guernsey Law 2012. It's actually a committee of the states of Guernsey, and it is now heading much of the bailiwick's wider response to the coronavirus crisis. It has some very far-reaching powers. The law was envisaged only to be used in extreme circumstances, such as the one we now face. It provides a vehicle for the rapid enactment of regulations when we face an emergency such as the one we now face. The types of emergency envisaged in the law are those that threaten human life and health, those that would cause environmental damage, or those that have to do with a problem relating to any vital infrastructure. Economic damage is not directly considered, but I will come to that a bit later. The law provides for a Civil Contingencies Authority, which, in normal circumstances, would meet just once a year in order to undertake contingency planning and to assess the risks and circumstances that might cause the government to activate its wider powers. The authority has 6 political representatives, 4 from Guernsey, the President of PNR, the President of the Committee for Health and Social Care, the President of the Committee for the Environment and the Infrastructure, and the President of the Committee for Home Affairs. It is advised as necessary by Guernsey civil servants from all important departments. There are also single political representatives from Alderney and Sark, but we are only part of the authority when the emergency is bailiwick-wide. I am the Alderney representative, and during the last 5 weeks, the authority has met, I think, some 14 times, and on occasions twice per day. And because of the fast-moving nature of the crisis, meetings have often needed to be at very short notice. The deliberations of the authority are confidential, and all members have sworn an oath not to divulge information relating to those deliberations. Gavin St. Pierre is the spokesperson for the CCA, and the regulations approved by the CCA are published on the gov.gg website. Having said this, the decisions of the authority are published almost immediately, and there are frequent press conferences hosted by the authority's chairman, Gavin St. Pierre. I'd like to now move on to safeguards. I think these are important. And the measures that have been introduced and any additional measures which may come in during the crisis can only have a limited 30-day life and must be deemed proportional to the crisis we are facing. If it goes beyond 30 days, we have to renew them. On this latter matter, Her Majesty's Procurer, who is Megan Pullen, and Her Majesty's Procurer is a fancy name for the head honcho law officer, but she is required to advise the authority. The measures must also not contravene the human rights bailiwick of Guernsey law of 2000. While all the emergency regulations have immediate effect in Alderney, they must be laid as soon as practicable, I think, before a meeting of our own states. And at that meeting, the states have the right to annul them. The CCA drafts the regulations. Now, this is important. The CCA drafts the regulations, but these regulations empower others to draft more detailed directives. And because this emergency is one that centers on our health and the protection of lives, it is mainly the Committee for Health and Social Care that has been empowered to draft and then promulgate these directives. Though having said this, the CCA is consulted and does give advice. It is therefore directives from the Committee for Health and Social Care that have closed our schools and which have imposed social distancing. A number of the regulations, such as on the control of premises, which are the ones that have closed shops and other business premises, and which have limited public gatherings, come from the Committee for Home Affairs. As has been shown over the last 2 weeks, the authority has been able to act very quickly, and this has been very important. It has almost certainly stopped the spread of the disease to Alderney and is very clearly reducing the spread in Guernsey. So, if I could now go quickly through some of the regulations we now have. We have regulations on the use of emergency powers, granting the bailiwick's medical officer of health the right to impose restrictions and requirements related to self-isolation, screening, and a wide group of other matters designed to protect our health. We have regulations on the control of premises, gatherings, and the movement of persons, granting, as the name implies, the Guernsey Committee for Home Affairs certain powers over premises and gatherings. We have regulations on school closing, granting the bailiwick medical officer of health again the power to issue directives relating to the opening and closing of schools. And we have regulations controlling events and gatherings, granting the Committee for Health and Social Care the power to control events, mainly entertainment. We have regulations for the remote operation of the States of Deliberation, the States of Alderney, and Chief Pleas of Sark. And we also have some regulations on other matters. These include the medical screening of persons, the assessments that are made, and the medical officer of health powers to detain. We have regulations on emergency registrations of medical and health professionals and pharmacists, registrations of deaths and stillbirths, which we have had to alter for the emergency, modifications to the legislations relating to cremations. In the field of health and safety, we have regulations for the temporary disapplication of certain rules. And last but not least, we have regulations on the operation of the Court of Appeal. And that's a whole pile of things that has been deemed necessary to put in place during the current emergency. There is a page providing access to the full text of these regulations, and it is now on the law officer's website. I'm not going to read out the name of the website, but you can find it under www.guernseylaw.officers.gg, and I think you should find it fairly easy to access should you want to. I'd like to move on now to an issue very pertinent to Alderney, which is why the schools in Alderney are closed. As you all know, schools will now be closed until half-term. The Committee for Health and Social Care advice was that closures should reduce the pandemic peak, but in fact, probably not by a very large amount. The Committee for Health and Social Care consider that the increased movements of people would actually be the main addition to risks, and that this could increase the pandemic peak. More importantly, it was, however, felt that teachers and parents would like certainty and on opening, and then having to close again if things got worse would be undesirable. The current focus is now, therefore, on distance learning. I could talk about the issues of takeaways and why SARC was being allowed to have people working outside singly or in pairs before we were, but I think that's been covered already by our President. There is, however, one thing I should say in regard to SARC. SARC is not part of the fiscal union that we share with Guernsey, and therefore will not be sharing the payroll co-funding, support to small businesses, and hardship funds that we can access. And so the Committee for Health and Social Care believed they had a greater case for a relaxation. SARC were also able to convince the Committee for Health and Social Care that they would be able to effectively monitor their derogation. I think I now need to say something about the economic impact and why it is perhaps not seen to be centre stage in the lockdown debates. This emergency began as a health emergency, but it is, of course, also an economic emergency. There is much call for the wider economic impact to be given greater prominence in decision-making. The CCA law currently sees economic impact to be a consequence of an environmental, health, or infrastructure-focused emergency, not a prima facie cause itself for declaring an emergency. There, however, could be changes around this. Clearly, if we damage our economy, we can do much collateral damage to the health of our community, possibly even more damage than coronavirus itself. After all, we need money to keep our health services operational. And also, I think we're all beginning to recognize some of the downsides to lockdown, the mental health issues that arise, the problems with reduced exercise, the perhaps greater dependency on alcohol, and indeed the sometimes fractious impacts of very close living within family. Fractious impacts that might not have occurred where we allowed more personal space. Now, if I could just give the listeners an estimate of the financial cost of the lockdown, because this is also very important and possibly a little bit mind-boggling. The financial cost of the bailiwick economy, and that's the whole of the bailiwick economy, of a 13-week lockdown, is presently estimated to be a little under £200 million. But I must emphasize this is only an estimate and could well rise when more is known. It will clearly be much higher if the lockdown continues for longer, and some people have suggested that if the lockdown lasted 6 months, then the cost could more than double. This is, as Gavin St. Pierre has suggested, an eye-watering sum, and this leads on to the question of where the money might come from to fund the lockdown itself. As you may have heard, Guernsey is looking to spend about half its core reserve fund. This will give about £100 million, and they're also looking to borrow another £500 million. And if you've been following the news, you will know that this matter will be debated shortly in the States of Deliberation in Guernsey. So now, to move on to the process for coming out of lockdown, which is a matter, of course, now being discussed, not only here, but all around the world. There are clearly a number of options, including waiting until there is a vaccine, though if we did this, we could well return to a totally devastated economy, and there would be questions of whether Guernsey would support us in such an action. There certainly could be pushback, particularly if Guernsey were not doing the same. A process involving an in-principle phased release has, however, been announced, and we will follow this process in Alderney, though it is always possible that the timings could be different. After all, there are differences in the way the disease is affecting our two islands. The timings and phasings of any alleviations from the lockdown will be based on a continuation of test, contact, trace and isolate, self-distancing, and something called adaptive triggering. Adaptive triggering means that when certain things have happened, the Committee for Health and Social Care would feel it appropriate to loosen the restrictions. Though, conversely, we could return to a high level of lockdown if the situation deteriorated. The triggers might, for example, include numbers of patients in intensive care, numbers of patients in wards, critical staff shortages or supply, the prevalence of the virus in the community, and, of course, any combination of the above. My last point now focuses on the differences between Alderney and Guernsey, and therefore whether the one-size-fits-all regulations are appropriate. Alderney has in fact been arguing for the last few weeks that we should be allowed to modify the regulations to suit our own situation. Having said that, we are not medical experts, and at the end of the day, we must take the advice of those who are. So, we are in a difficult position. We have limited on-island medical facilities, and we rely on the facilities Guernsey provide. Guernsey, quite rightly, must have confidence in the actions we take, and it is right we do not implement anything that the medical authorities in Guernsey have not approved. So, yes, we are in the process of setting up a pandemic subcommittee, and we hope can feed in information to the CCA, the Committee for Health and Social Care, and the Committee for Home Affairs. The intention is that this committee might be able to provide these organizations with the information and confidence that we have a good case for any of the modifications we might suggest. In fact, the Committee for Health and Social Care has already said it will welcome suggestions for bespoke modifications. And now, and only briefly, to how PNF fits in and plays its role while the CCA is taking on what would normally be its own responsibilities. PNF has formed a subcommittee for advising the CCA, as I have just said, for advising the CCA, the Committee for Health and Social Care, and the Committee for Home Affairs on matters relating to the crisis. PNF is, however, looking at recovery planning. It has now received a report looking at the impact of coronavirus on the current year's budget. The report suggests that many income sources, including fees for vehicle import, hire cars, property transfer duties, permits, licenses, and harbour services, will all be reduced. The committee has, however, recognised and welcomed the fact that most of the support measures in Guernsey also apply in Alderney, though they have noted that there are some Guernsey measures that were not applicable in Alderney. PNF was advised that amongst those that did not apply that should be supported by the states of Alderney were potential concessions on mooring fees for commercial fishermen and deferral of commercial rent payments. These would mirror similar measures in Guernsey. Short-term measures have also been taken to freeze recruitment and defer or cancel planned activities which will not now take place in 2020. The report set out that the current budget can possibly be balanced if the adjustments which I have just described are made. And this is good news. However, there is much uncertainty, and without further savings, the current emergency could still result in a budget shortfall. It will therefore be necessary to keep the budget under review, and further changes may be needed. The committee was also advised about the need to identify and prioritize funds that can support recovery. Sources for this could include the Alderney Gambling Control Commission funds, the Economic Development Reserve, and a reprioritization of the capital and revenue budgets. In short, the financial implications for our budget are clearly significant. We are, however, taking action to ensure we know as much as possible about where we stand. We intend to free up as much funding as possible to support the island's economy, and we will be looking at a range of options for sourcing additional funds. Thank you for listening. I have tried to give an insight this morning into what is going on, and I hope I have succeeded. And I have decided that tomorrow the President is welcome to have his regular slot back. I'm not a masochist, but I will welcome a return to normality and even to Tony LeBlanc's Q&A sessions. In a strange way, answering questions is easier than putting together a spiel like today's and hoping that what you have put together is what the audience wanted to hear. Thank you, Dougal, and thank you, listeners.
Well, James, firstly, thank you very much on a very well explained document. and people realise, I think, how busy everybody is at the moment. Lots of work going on in the background, but people don't realise. And thank you very much for the explanation. As I say, this will be it is recorded, so we're hoping to get it loaded onto the Facebook and YouTube this afternoon, and people will be able to listen, and they'll get the opportunity to listen again at 9:15 this evening. So, James Dent, Head of Policy and Finance, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dougal.
Okay, bye for now. Bye.
Alderneys Key FM.